Today, we are joined by Steve Hilton, Republican candidate for governor of California. Steve Hilton is an entrepreneur, political commentator, author, and founder of Golden Together, a policy organization focused on California governance and reform. Originally from the United Kingdom, he served as a senior advisor to former British Prime Minister David Cameron and has been an active voice in California public policy debates. Mr. Hilton, thank you so much for joining us. Please begin with your opening remarks. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm really happy to be with you. I think, like all of us, I love this beautiful state of ours. California is the most amazing place in the world, as far as I'm concerned. I'm a proud immigrant, a new American citizen. As you mentioned, my parents were well, I don't think you said Hungarian. They were refugees from communism, and I was born in England. Moved here in 2012 with my wife and my 2 sons. Since moving here, I've taught at Stanford University, started a business, had a whole new career in the media. I've lived the California dream. And I think the simple reason I'm running is that dream, of course, is just not there for most people. We've had 16 years now with one party in control of everything in California. It's been an experiment in a particular form of governance, progressive governance, which the party that's been in charge uses to say it's a model for the rest of the nation. Gavin Newsom says that all the time. If you look at the facts, it's not a very good model to follow. I don't want to get too partisan, but let's just be real about the actual state of things in California. Right now, today, California has the highest poverty rate of any state. We're tied with Louisiana for the top. We have the highest unemployment rate of all 50 states, the highest cost of living by far. When you break down cost of living within that, gas prices the highest in the country, electric bills the highest ever except for Hawaii, highest housing costs, lowest home ownership. Some of the more qualitative measures, for example, US News and World Report in its annual rankings ranks California 50th out of 50 states for opportunity. That's a shameful statistic given how we should think about California as the home of opportunity. Chief Executive Magazine does an annual survey of business conditions. For the last 10 years, California has been 50th out of 50 states. When we think of ourselves as the home of entrepreneurs and innovation. So in all these things, I think it's very clear we need a change of direction and a bit of balance in our system. It's not healthy to have one party controlling everything for so long. So I'm arguing for a positive, practical change plan to make our state Cal-affordable, $3 gas, cut your electric bills in half, your first 100 grand tax-free, a home you can afford to buy, to make California the best place once again to start and raise a family, to start and run a business. That's my plan, and happy to dive into any areas that you'd like to follow up on.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hilton. My first question is on immigration. California's immigrant communities are central to the state's economy and identity, but immigration policy remains deeply polarized nationally. You have criticized California's approach to immigration enforcement and border policy. How would your administration approach immigration differently, particularly regarding cooperation with federal authorities, undocumented workers who have lived in California for years, and access to education and health services for immigrant families?
So I think the number one point that we need to make is that we've got a situation in California where legal immigrants like myself, and I've said very clearly, I'm a candidate of the legal immigrant community for the legal immigrant community, are being denied, many people being denied the basics of the ladder of opportunity that we want to see for our immigrant communities here in California. Exactly the kind of opportunities that I remember my parents, I grew up in a working class immigrant household in England. I know exactly what that's like. My stepfather, also Hungarian, worked construction. That was my childhood, helping out, earning a bit of extra money on the construction site. My first job was project manager for a construction company, and so on. So I deeply understand that. But the other thing that we have to bear in mind is, first of all, that immigration policy, of course, is not a responsibility of the governor. It is a responsibility of the federal government. And I very much agree with all the arguments that have been made over the past few years by Democrats about the importance of honoring election results and not undermining democracy. And so the results of the last presidential election were very, very clear. One candidate, one party won all the swing states, popular vote on a very clear platform on immigration policy. And the administration is now implementing the verdict of the people. And the question for the next governor of California is, are you going to actively work against the results of the 2024 election when it comes to immigration policy or not? And I think that actually I don't think that's even an option realistically if you want to be true to your principles of upholding the Constitution and the rule of law, to actually obstruct the implementation of federal law, which is what immigration policy is. So the difference you will see with me as governor is that instead of the confrontational approach, which has led to some of these scenes that I don't think any of us want to see, for example, as we saw in Los Angeles last summer, or even worse in Minneapolis earlier this year, I don't want to see anything like that in California. And we won't have that when I'm governor, because we will have an approach which is that all the laws must be peacefully enforced, and we will not obstruct the implementation of federal immigration law.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to follow up that with a question from Araceli Martinez Ortega. She's a freelance journalist writing for Excelsior newspaper.
As you are in favor of the President Trump's enforcement against immigrants, what would your approach as a governor? Because according to the data that I have, around 70% of the workers on the fields are undocumented. And if you or your government helps to deport them, what is going to happen with the billionaire agriculture in California? I don't know if you are aware of that situation.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would not characterize the administration's approach as being against immigrants. Of course, we have a very large number of legal immigrants every year in America, and I fully support that. We are pro-immigration, but it has to be legal immigration. I think everyone agrees with that. Secondly, I've spent a lot of time in the agricultural part of our state and learning and spending time with farmers, farm workers in the fields, etc. In fact, right now, literally now, I'm in Fresno, right in the heart of the Central Valley. And I've been here a lot over the past 3 years that I've been working on these policies. I think that everybody agrees that it's not healthy for our society to have such a large part of our society dependent on law breaking, whether that's for the workers themselves or for the employers. It's not good. It's not healthy. So we have to have, I think, this is the consequence of at least 50 years of policy where Democrats and Republicans, when we look at the actual breakdown of the numbers, it's actually a bit lower than when it comes to specifically to farm workers, which is that increasingly you're seeing those jobs that where, well, here's a couple of things I would say. First of all, we have, as I mentioned earlier, the highest unemployment rate of all 50 states. Secondly, in California today, we have a historically low labor force participation rate. That is the percentage of adults who are of working age who are not working, who are working. That number right now in California is about 62%. At its highest, you have a number of around somewhere between 4 and 5 million California adults who could work, who could be working but are not working. They're being paid not to work by taxpayers through the welfare system. And I think that's not fair. If you work really hard, why should you subsidize somebody else not to work? I'll give you a specific example actually from the agricultural area. I was in a dairy plant in, where is it? Hilmar, north end of the Central Valley near Modesto. And I was talking to the dairy workers there. They don't make a huge amount of money. They're full-time making 40 to 50 grand a year. And they were telling me that their girlfriends make more money than them and don't work on the various welfare benefits. And they were showing me the paperwork. And I just think that's wrong. And so I don't think it's a reasonable thing to have a system where we say, oh, we can't find Americans to do these jobs, so we have to import labor from other countries illegally, while we have millions of Californians who are not working. I think that's a broken system. And it's a very expensive system because we're paying for the wear and people are paying their taxes. So we got to get this system back in order. Another point I will make, I was at the Ag Fair in Tulare, the World Ag Expo, a couple of months ago, and the advances in automation in agriculture are enormous. Now, in California, we have not seen some of that automation deployed because of union practices. In other states, including Oregon, you're seeing much greater inroads made by automation into the farm worker area. And so I think that's something we need to change. These rules are ridiculous. And I think in years to come, not that far away, a vast majority of the jobs that are currently there.
The connection seems to be coming and going. Anyway, we wanted to go to healthcare. And I'm curious to hear what will be your priorities for California's healthcare system as governor? Would you maintain, reduce, or redesign programs that expanded access to healthcare? And how would you address affordability and provider shortages?
Well, I think, again, we have to come to this. We have to be honest about the situation. I speak to hospitals in many parts of the state, and one of the reasons that we have there's two things that are going on. You've got a whole series of distressed hospitals are just not able to make it work. Labor regulations that have just made it expensive to operate. Secondly, you've got demand that is overwhelming them. You also see it in schools, and that's a consequence of the uncontrolled immigration that we've seen in recent years. And so these things have to be addressed honestly. I also think it's not reasonable to ask California taxpayers to pay money from their taxes to subsidize healthcare for citizens of other countries. I don't think that's reasonable. And so one thing that I've said is that we need to end that and get in line with what happens in the rest of the country. For example, I agree with the leaders of the Democrat Party nationally. So Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, who've made it clear that it's actually against when it comes to federal law, it's against the law for citizens of other countries to be receiving healthcare benefits other than that prescribed by Congress. And that's the position I support for California.
Let's see. We have also a question about affordability. And you have talked about this a lot in the debates and elsewhere. You have argued that California is becoming unaffordable because of government dysfunction and overregulation. What are the first 3 actions you would take as governor to lower costs for working and middle-class Californians?
So the number one is the most quick and direct way we can lower costs is through what the government charges. The government taking money directly from people through taxes. So we have the highest taxes in the country, but we have the worst results. And so number one is my tax plan to eliminate state income tax under 100,000. So your first 100 grand tax free. That's my first step. Obviously, to do that, we need to reduce spending. But the cost of that move is about $8 billion. Our estimate is that the annual cost of waste and fraud and abuse in our budget is about $80 billion. So this is very affordable. So that's number one, first 100 grand tax free. Secondly, I want to eliminate the small business tax. Every small business has to pay $800 a year just for existing. For many small businesses, that's really difficult. Thirdly, I want to match the no tax on tips proposal that's been implemented at the federal level. I want that in California state taxes. Right now, most other states have matched the federal policy on no tax on tips. But in California, tips are still being taxed in state taxes. I want to change that. These are all things that we can do that will make a difference. The other one on that's a quick change that is directly controlled by the government is vehicle registration. To register your car or your truck in California is way more expensive than in other states. In most states, it is $100 or less to register your vehicle every year. And I want to get that down. My proposal is $71 flat fee registration per person per year for your vehicle. So those are the specific things that are immediate. The other changes that we need to make just take longer to work through the system. For example, reversing the damaging energy policies we have, so we can have $3 gas, cut your electric bills in half, reduce the cost of housing. Those things will take a bit longer. The most direct way is to reduce taxes.
Nestor Fantini, would you ask your question, please? From Hispanic LA.
Mr. Hilton, the Trump administration has been promoting the idea that we need to eliminate all those programs that emphasize diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you are elected governor, do you intend to actually follow those goals of the Trump administration?
Well, it depends on what you mean. I think that's a very broad question. I would want to make sure that in each particular area, we are using taxpayer money wisely. I think that what you've seen happen in California is that the budget has nearly doubled in the last 10 years, doubled, and yet everything is worse. And so there's a lot of waste and inappropriate spending of money in the government system. So you go through each area, what's happening in universities, what's happening in the public schools, the areas that are directly controlled by the government. And I want to make sure that the money that we have, that we take from taxpayers who work incredibly hard and struggle to make ends meet, that we are using that money only for the purpose that really people would support. For example, in our public schools, we have terrible results, in particular for Latino and Black kids, disastrous results in terms of English and reading and math. That means that you're never going to have the chance of the California dream if you can't read, if you can't do math. So the focus of our spending must be on in the schools, for example, on academic instruction. And I do think that what I'm hearing from parents is that they are seeing that in the public school system, for example, there is too much emphasis on these politicized things and not enough emphasis on the basics of teaching kids to read and write and do math.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Chico Sol, and it's about wildfires and climate change. Climate change is driving faster and more explosive wildfires in the state. What would you do in the area of prevention? How would you help homeowners face high insurance rates that are surging in response to recent fire losses?
Well, I think if you look at the actual data on wildfires, the real correlation is with changes in forest management practices. So one thing that you can do, and also we've got to be precise about the different areas. In Northern California, in the Sierras, most of the ignitions of wildfires are natural, lightning strikes. That's a natural part of the forest, and we should not be suppressing those fires. What we've got to do, which is what's been happening too much, what we actually need to do is have a more natural, organic approach to this. We need to forest better, just as we used to touch better. Even if you look back 100 years and you look at photos of the Yosemite area, for example, there are far fewer trees, much more clearings. The forest has been allowed to become overgrown, overdense. That means that when you have a naturally occurring fire, it more likely becomes a mega wildfire. And actually, that makes climate change worse. For example, in 2020, the last year we had really big mega wildfires. The fires released more CO2 emissions than was saved by the previous 20 years of climate change policy in California, wiped out. So we need to manage the forest better. In Southern California, the ignitions of wildfires are nearly all human, whether that is on accident or arson or homeless encampments. Those are the main sources of ignitions of wildfires in Southern California, just as we saw with the terrible Los Angeles fires in the Pacific Palisades fire, which was the result of arson. And so we've got to, but again, the point is the same in terms of prevention and mitigation. We've got to have better fuel management. In in this case of the Palisades fire, you saw people who were trying to do the responsible thing and protect their property and create defensible space and have fire breaks in the brush, being fined by a state agency for messing around with the habitat. So that all of this extreme environmentalism has to go. When it comes to insurance, there's a couple of things. The reason that we have this problem with insurance is that so many companies have been driven out of the market in California. That's been happening over the last 10 years or so as a direct result of over-regulation. You've just made it much too... The insurance commissioner, starting with the previous guy, Paul Jones, David Jones, something like that, stopped the insurance companies from factoring in future risks like climate change and the cost of reinsurance into their policies. Now that meant that they couldn't make it work financially. So a lot of the companies left the state. Now the current insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, has actually finally corrected that. That happened at the end of 2024. So that's good. We still need to do some other things. First of all, it is still way too bureaucratic, the regulation of insurance, that is off-putting to companies. In the original proposition that set up the whole regulatory framework for insurance, Prop 103, there's a very specific timeline for approving rate changes, 60 days. It takes now more than a year, often, sometimes 2 years. So that's really adds cost to the insurance company. That's why they're leaving. Secondly, we have to make sure that we stop these lawsuits. We've had an explosion of nuisance, exploitative, extortionate lawsuits filed, which increase the cost of insurance for everybody. It's estimated that what they call the tort tax adds from $3,000 to $15,000 to everybody's premiums. So we've got to tackle these lawsuits and stop them from driving up the cost and driving the insurance companies out of the state.
My question is, how do you address hate speech from politicians, even whether it's nationwide or statewide? And what is your policy against hate crimes?
Well,
Thanks.
my policy against hate crimes is my policy against crime, which is we need to deter crime and prosecute crime very strongly. We are much too soft on crime in California. That's why we've had an explosion of crime. And so I've published a paper on fighting crime on my policy website, goldentogether.com, that makes it clear that we need to have a guarantee of punishment, but also rehabilitation for people who commit crimes. Right now, that's not happening. Also, we have to reverse the prison closure program because that has affected law enforcement right up and down the state in a negative way, where people, we've had tens of thousands of dangerous, violent criminals transferred into the community or transferred to county jails, which are overcrowded. That means that at the local level, prosecutors and judges know that there's no point in, giving custodial sentences because the jails are full. So as a result of that, law enforcement are undermined. They say that what's the point in actually going after criminals because whether hate crimes or any other kind of crime, because nothing's going to happen. They call
Can I ask for your?
So I think we need to be much. Hang on a second. Let me get to the end. Secondly, we need to support law enforcement. I think that we've undermined law enforcement to the point where it's actually most of these police departments are way under capacity. Los Angeles is a good example. When it comes
what about
to
prevention measures before it happens?
Very much agree with that. And I therefore think that's one, and the best thing we can do on prevention is rehabilitation, because a large proportion of crime is repeat crime, recidivism. And so we have one of the highest rates of recidivism in the country. If we even match the best in America, I mean, some other countries do a really good job of this, some of the European countries, but the best performing in America is Virginia, whose rate of recidivism is less than half of what we have in California. That would be huge. That's the biggest thing we can do on prevention. That's why we need proper rehabilitation in our system, and it's not happening. I mean, and you've got to look at the causes. Like, for example, I really appreciate your question. For example, there's some really shocking statistics. For example, I think it's up to something like 60 or even 65% of people in prison are dyslexic, which is perhaps undiagnosed in their childhood. And I'm not saying there's a direct causal relationship, of course, between having something like that and committing crime, but it's a contributory factor often. And I think that it's very important that there was a very important statement made by a former Labour Party leader and Prime Minister in the UK, Tony Blair, which I very much agree with, which was to say we need to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime.
How about
And I
hate
think
crime? Hate crime is
Okay, Nancy. Okay, it's fine. We need to
No,
close
I
because we
agree
have
on hate
2
crime,
minutes.
and I just want to. I think Nancy raises a very important point, and I just want to say that hate crime is something that we must not be tolerated. And I think we've seen too lax an attitude, particularly with regard to hate crime against Asian people and hate crime against Jewish people. Those are the two that have been particularly obnoxious and offensive in California, and I don't think we've been tough enough on them. I agree with you.
Okay, great. We need to close because we have only 1 minute left, but I want to know if you would support some kind of immigration reform passed by Congress to legalize workers that are in this country for a long time, have families,
I really
etc.
don't want to weigh in on the immigration debate because it's a national thing. I'm running for governor of California, and I really want to focus on my responsibilities, which is to make sure that all the laws in our state are peacefully enforced. And again, I want to end the way I began, which is I'm an immigrant. I'm a proud immigrant. If you like, I'm an immigrant twice over. My parents were refugees in England, and I grew up in an immigrant working class household, and now I'm an immigrant here in California. And it really is the heart of what I want to achieve, which is to restore that ladder of opportunity for every immigrant family, every legal immigrant family, when we have to have a distinction between legal and illegal immigration. Otherwise, we don't have a proper system of government and order in our country. And I think that ideal of the California dream for our immigrant community is very precious to me, and that is what I want to restore.
Mr. Hilton, we really appreciate you coming to talk to us, and we thank you.
Well, I really appreciate it too, and hope we can continue the dialogue. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and your presence.